What's going on, y'all? My name's Damien, and on this channel, I basically talk about all things DevSecOps and cloud security. I also have founded an open source project called the DevSec Blueprint, which essentially is to act as a guide for people who would like to transition into DevSecOps or who would like to create and start their career within DevSecOps and cloud DevSecOps. And today's video, I'm basically just going to be defining that roadmap for y'all for the year of 2025. What does it take to get into DevSecOps and what type of skills you need? So without further ado, let's just get right into it. All right. So first things first is, again, as I said in the intro, I'm the founder and also tech lead of the DevSec Blueprint, which is essentially a comprehensive free and open source learning guide that I created, and I'm working with other people as well to create more content that will help y'all get the essential skills and knowledge that you need to get a job or start your career as a DevSecOps professional, and also grow within your career as a DevSecOps professional if you wish to become some type of senior or principal, right? So the key thing is that in order for you to really understand DevSecOps or to really get into it, there's a lot of things that you need to have, or a lot of foundational knowledge that you need to have, right? You definitely want to make sure, and I'm also going to just touch on some of the prerequisites because this is essentially some of the concepts that you really need to know before you even think about transitioning or getting into this field, right? So when you think about DevSecOps, and I'm not really going to tell y'all how long you should take to study these concepts or how long it should take to even learn more about DevSecOps, because time is different for everyone. And as I stated at the very bottom of this page, right, getting started, you don't necessarily have to finish this entire blueprint within one go because it's going to take time. And I'm constantly making updates and changes as the market changes, right? But before we get into that, concepts you need to know. So when you look at DevSecOps, you look at DevOps, right? DevOps is actually one of the foundational concepts that you would really need to understand because DevSecOps is an extension of DevOps. It's basically secure DevOps. But you definitely want to make sure that you understand Git or version control systems. And the reason why is because when you, as a developer, right, someone who writes code every day, I'm checking in my code and registering all of that into GitHub, which is a version control system. And GitHub leverages Git, right? And when you think about all the various different, types of software that they have out there and version control systems, there's GitHub, Bitbucket, GitLab. A lot of the code that's being compiled and built within DevOps pipelines, right, or CICD pipelines, it comes from the version control systems. So you want to learn those or pick one, which I would say GitHub. You definitely want to make sure you check all of your code in GitHub, but you really need to learn Git in order for you to be able to accomplish that. You also want to make sure that you learn Linux and Bashes. Linux and Bash is so important. And the reason why I'm going to say that is because when you are creating, like DevOps pipelines or any type of CI/CD pipelines, you want to make sure that, you know, you're automating this, and most of the stuff is going to be in Linux. A lot of the systems that the code is going to be compiling on is going to be a Linux system or some type of Linux system. When it comes down to, programming concepts, key reason why I would say you really need to learn programming concepts is because, let's say if you ever become a DevSecOps engineer and you're writing automated tools and processes, some of those tools will definitely need to be optimized over time. And you're not really going to understand how to optimize them unless you understand foundational programming concepts. If I had to choose what type of programming language you should start with, if you're not a programmer already, Python is the most and the easiest language out there. Honestly, it has a lot of support. GitHub definitely said that Python is the most used language, or that has been registered pretty much in their database of code bases. Another thing that you really want to have a firm foundational understanding of is networking. So networking, when it comes down to you being able to configure things, create things, knowing your protocols is pretty important because you definitely want to know what protocols are secure and which ones aren't. HTTP, right, is not secure, but HTTPS is. These URLs that you see right here, when it says connection is secure and all the stuff like that, this is running on HTTPS, which is port 443. So learning your ports and learning your protocols, it not only makes you a lot better when it comes to knowing and when it comes to troubleshooting issues that you may run across with firewalls and stuff like that. But it also helps you understand how you can configure things in an automated fashion as well. And that kind of falls underneath the scope of DevSecOps when you sit down and you think about it, because you could be writing something, or you could be creating a pipeline that is supposed to automatically configure your firewalls on a Linux system or something like that, right before you deploy an application. So there are certain things that you would really need to know, but I would say networking is very, very important regardless, because it's you got to understand how things really work over the wire, and that's just basic things, right? But when you really look into networking, and I'll kind of outline these in a certain way, networking really helps you understand your basic security concepts, which is the next thing you really want to understand, right? When you have a solid foundation of those security concepts, like knowledge of encrypting things, what authentication is and how that works, access control, and then also some of those common threats, it really makes it easier for you to understand how to secure them at a much deeper level. So understanding your basic security concepts and networking is pretty important. So you definitely want to make sure you have a foundational understanding of those as well. These are a couple of YouTube videos that I picked out that really kind of give you a good overview of it. But when it comes to networking, there are two certifications that networking and security. There are two certifications that I would recommend. One of them is the CompTIA Security Plus, and this one is one of the most common exams out there, but it's a entry-level certification to get yourself into cybersecurity. It really gives you all the necessary knowledge and skills that you need at a very foundational and fundamental level so that you can effectively secure things. And then the next thing would be, for networking purposes, is Network Plus, which is another CompTIA cert. I personally never got the Network Plus, but I have read it, and it is definitely a beast. So if you're interested in reading or learning more about those, definitely look into those two certifications. But the Security Plus is definitely one that I would recommend. And I also have a YouTube video, which I'll link at the very end of this video as well, if you want to learn more about that. Now, when it comes down to basic security concepts, we kind of got that out of the way. A lot of these concepts that I have, at least these 5 before we get into DevOps, CICD, and cloud computing, are pretty much foundational. And these are the ones that you really want to have a good, firm understanding of, because it's going to help you accelerate on really learning what DevSecOps is, right? Now, of course, DevOps is pretty important. DevOps essentially it's a cultural movement, right? People want to accelerate. They want to move fast at deploying things into various different environments. But the problem with this approach is that security is often an afterthought. So the DevSecOps engineer, architect, or whomever is pretty much going to be the person that's going to ensure that security is baked into every phase of DevOps, and ensuring that, when we're deploying our applications, when we're deploying things, we're doing it securely, which is pretty much correctly and the most effective. So DevOps guide, Learn the Cloud really covers it really well. And then there's also this YouTube video I've handpicked. It was just all right, this is a really good explanation, right? What is DevOps and how do we really understand it? And last but not least, you have CICD. It is a concept of DevOps that really helps define how things are deployed, right? We'll do continuous integration and continuous deployment, right? And you have to really understand what that means. And when you look at, CICD, right? The DevOps guide, they cover it really, really well. And they even give you some ideas of what a CICD pipeline will look like, right? Most CICD pipelines will build their application. They will test the application. They will release it, right? Or prep it for release, and then also deploy it, right, into whatever environment that you want to deploy it into. And there are some resources that you can look at too right here, like the Ideal and Practical CI/CD Pipeline, which is a YouTube video, as well as Tech World with Nana. She came out with a YouTube video on how to create a GitHub Actions pipeline, right, which is essentially a CI/CD pipeline when you look at it. So look at the CI/CD, because guess what? A lot of DevSecOps pipeline are CI/CD pipelines. The difference is that most of them will have a couple of additional stages wherein they're going to be testing your application or your code or whatever, or scanning it for security purposes. right? Now, and last but not least, cloud computing. Cloud computing in itself is up and coming. It's also one of those things where it really takes you outside of just being on-prem and talking about the cloud. I would say cloud computing is something that you should strive to know. You should strive to learn. But if you're just wanting to just be a DevSecOps engineer, based on all the things I've seen, especially with applications and stuff like that, it is not a thing that will hold you back, but it will definitely help you stand out when you're applying for different jobs and stuff like that. So I would say like learn all of these first, and then when you come to cloud computing, like understand what it is. And if you want to become a cloud DevSecOps engineer, then yeah, add it to your plate so that you can learn what the cloud is and then start studying for certifications. So let's talk more about like the blueprint itself, right? So because there's still more things that you really need to learn. And when we get into DevSecOps, there's application security is another thing. Now, why is application security like a completely different thing when it comes to like basic security concepts and stuff like that? Well, the thing is, when you're looking at defending or, like you're looking at trying to secure your applications, right? Because DevSecOps engineers, that's pretty much what you're going to be doing. You're going to be working with applications of all different types. The key thing is that you really need to understand why application security is important, because this really kind of defines the role for a DevSecOps engineer in so many different cases, right? Especially when you're building out those pipelines. So you really got to understand application security and why it's important. There's also the OWASP top 10, right? These are the most common vulnerabilities for applications that people experience based on like all the information and results that comes from like various different organizations within several industries. This catalog of AppSec vulnerabilities, it stays up to date. So they update it quite frequently, so it will always change. So you always want to make sure you keep an eye out on this and learn about all the various different, security risks for web apps, because these are the things that you're probably going to want to pay very close attention to. When it comes to SaaS, DaaS, these are just like two foundational concepts and methods that you really want to understand, because when you create and build out those pipelines and stuff like that, those CICD pipelines, right, you're most likely going to end up baking SaaS and DaaS into them, right? Now, programming concepts, you might see the software development lifecycle come into play when you start to understand those things. And the reason why is because the software development lifecycle in itself is very, very important, because when it comes down to DevOps, you're most likely going to be automating the deployment aspect of it, right? The deployment and also the testing aspect. And the deployment stage of this is really the most important part, because this is where the CI/CD pipelines really come into the deployment phase. It also can be baked into the development phase as well, because when you're constantly using Git, as I said earlier, to push your code up, you're probably running your pipeline against the code so that you can see what vulnerabilities are coming out as you're developing things, right? When you're continuing to commit your changes in and push things up, right? Understanding the SDLC, software development lifecycle, is very, very important. But the thing is that DevSecOps really is founded upon the secure software development lifecycle, because this in itself is really a concept that you understand how security is embedded into each phase of the software development lifecycle at a very high level. And when you look at it, you can see that this is a plain old software development lifecycle that you definitely should not use. When you look at the secure software development lifecycle, you can see that you still have all those same phases, those 5 phases, but you now have all these other different ones as well. So you can see that when you create the requirements or you start to design, this is basically like, okay, we designed the application, but now we actually need to go through threat modeling, right? Which is basically inspecting the design and calling out any type of potential security issues so that you mitigate that as you start developing them. Now you get into the development stage, right? Now, mind you, in this development phase, yeah, you're building out your application, no problem, but you got a pipeline in the background. As every time you make a change to your application, you push it up on a different branch in GitHub, right, using Git. You then start to scan your application, right, during the process. And this is where that static analysis comes into play. right? There's also the testing aspect of it, right? So now you got security testing and code review. So before you merge your changes, or before your changes are accepted and queued up for promotion, there has to go be some security testing, right, and code review process. So this could be where we add in those DAS tools and SAS tools and stuff like that. And then you get into the code reviewing and stuff like that. There's the deployment, which is security assessments and secure configuration. Now, deploying it, when you get to that point, you're most likely going to end up having a pipeline that's going to ensure that everything checks out. All your unit tests are passing, all your code tests are passing, and so on and so forth before you move forward, right? And then goal continues to go back. Requirements, design, blah, 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 blah. So think about all of these things when you're basically building out code, but the secure SDLC is most important. And this is a concept you really need to know. This is a concept that you have to really, really break down. And I kind of go over that for you here and really kind of go through and explain like what all of this is and what this means, right? I forget to say in testing as well, this could also be penetration tests. So you can have your app in a dev environment and somebody comes, it's like, yeah, let me conduct a pen test on that. And then somebody comes and conducts a pen test, tries to hack into your application. And if they do, they find things, they let you know what those things are. And you go back to fix them before you release it into, production or anything like that, right? So think about that. And these are like various different aspects. Like I said, we cover this in more detail, but you really, really need to know that secure SDLC. And in the blueprint, similar to how I have with all the prerequisites, I recommend a lot of books. I recommend a lot of resources, YouTube videos, and all that good stuff for each one of these things that I'm discussing with y'all to really understand the concepts and then understand DevSecOps as a whole, right? So once you understand AppSec, you understand the secure SDLC, you understand DevOps, version control systems, programming, Linux, CICD, then you start to really see what DevSecOps is and what it really means, right? So according to Red Hat, as you can see, DevSecOps stands for Development, Security, and Operations, right? It's an approach to the culture, or basically the modification of the existing culture. That's how I would approach it, or how I would say it, to basically create and cultivate this culture where security is pretty much a shared responsibility across the development team, security teams, and also the operations teams. Point blank, period. At a very high level, that's exactly what it is. And everything else just kind of rolls with it and becomes incredibly more like complex and nuanced as you go along. But the thing that I want y'all to understand is that the ultimate goal of DevSecOps is basically to shift left, right? We don't want vulnerabilities showing up in prod, and we don't want security being an afterthought. So DevSecOps is clearly the thing where you really want to shift all of that left and continue to shift it left. The closer it is to the developer, the closer security is to the developer, and also baked into anything that the operations teams creates and stuff like that, the better off everything will be. The key thing that you got to be ready for is you have to be ready to collaborate quite a bit, because you're going to be collaborating with a lot of various different teams. So amongst all of the technical requirements and things that I've mentioned, the key soft skill that you need to have is communication. You have to be able to communicate with people and really be able to communicate effectively, right? Because that's the key thing. It's not just building out pipelines. You also have to collaborate on things. You're going to have to work with the security team. You're going to have to work with operations. You have to work with SREs. You're going to have to work with the developers. So you're going to have to do a lot of collaborating and communicating. So remember that, right? Remember that. And I didn't really say that in the DevSec blueprint, but I will be sure to add that. I would be sure to add a section for soft skills, right? Soft skills you need, not just hard skills. These are a list of books that I've also handpicked out and also gotten recommendations from, because some of these books I have not read, I will be honest. And the key thing is you really want to go through, you want to just go and read them. You just want to read them. There's some articles at the bottom. When it comes to certifications, this is a really big one, right? This is a really big one. And the key reason why is because I know a lot of people are very, very are very inquisitive. They'll ask a lot of questions. And the key thing that everyone wants to understand is, what certifications do I need to take? And that's a good question. When it comes to DevSecOps, I will say this. As I mentioned earlier, the Network Plus, you can take it if you want, if you really want to learn more about networking. But I always recommend just to like buy the book, read it, and understand some of the protocols and concepts of it. You definitely want to make sure that CompTIA Security Plus, you get that. You get your Linux Plus, especially because Linux is going to be a very, very important piece of this. Containerization and container management platforms like Kubernetes, you definitely want to understand. You want to know Docker and all those different tools as well. So if you get certified in Kubernetes, whether it be the CKA or the CKAD, those are going to help you a lot. These are the two certifications that I've seen as well. They are pretty expensive. Ideally, if you want to take the CDP, you definitely can. The CDE, you can as well, but they're pretty expensive. I would suggest like actually going through and getting these certifications first and then seeing if someone can sponsor you when you get the job. But I wouldn't spend my money on these two at the moment. Now, if you're looking to get into the cloud, it's a different story, but you definitely want to make sure you get a security cert as well as some other certs in a specific cloud service provider. If I had to tell you which one you should study for or you should look into getting for 2025, I would choose either AWS or Microsoft Azure. Those two are pretty much like running the market right now, with AWS being the most popular and also having, I would say, the best community out there. Definitely look into those. So now that we talked about that, we kind of defined the things you really need to know. And I've kind of given you an overview of DevSecOps as a whole and just kind of walk through it a little bit. Some of the certifications that you need to know and that you should get. When you cover all the theory that I have here, especially when it comes to defining your pipelines, I would highly recommend you do one thing, and that is practice, and that is build. You're not really going to understand how things truly work until you actually put it into practice and actually build. And that's where I spent a lot of time building out this home lab, because in this home lab, I'm basically, not only am I building out those DevSecOps pipelines, but I'm also implementing monitoring and logging with Prometheus and Grafana. I'm leveraging Docker, so I'm really learning a lot about containerization. I got Nessus for, like checking in my compiled code and storing it in some type of like repository for artifacts. You learn a lot about how to be able to build these things out. And when you're building out your DevSecOps pipelines, follow this guide, because in a sense, this is one way, or the expectation, when you're building out your DevSecOps pipelines. This is what some of your stages should look like, right? When you're building it out, you should be able to check out your code. You should build it, right? You should build your code, whether it will be like a Python project, making sure that all of your dependencies install, making sure that you can build your Docker images. You want to make sure you do that. You want to make sure you're running your various different tests. You got unit tests, acceptance tests, integration tests. These are various different types of tests that you can learn about. You do a little bit of research, but unit test is very common. Test is the code in a modular way. Acceptance testing and integration testing is there three different things, but they all have or add value in various different ways. And the most important part, as I would say, is the security scanning, right? You want to make sure you got some SAS scanning in there, some DAS scanning. You want to make sure you do some container security scanning. And then the most important part, or another important part, would be the dependency scanning. And this one, I would say, is pretty important, because nowadays most applications import or they leverage things that have already been built, that is been checked into, like the repositories that like Maven or PyPy for Python and stuff like that. And the thing is, some of those dependencies could be using vulnerable components that come from other places, right? So you can have transitive vulnerabilities for that could be critical, that could hurt your application. So it's always good to make sure you have dependency scanning at the minimum. And then the deployment stage, right? And then now you got this stage where it's basically just like, yeah, let's archive all of the artifacts, any type of unit testing, any type of like Java jars that we're creating, right? This is where I was talking about that artifact repo. We can deploy those in there, or we can save them. If you're using Jenkins, you can save them. And then these are the list of security tools that I have listed out, handpicked for, SaaS scanning, DAS scanning, container security, and cloud security as well. If I have to tell you what type of security tools you should use, again, all of these ones that I've listed out are free. They are open source to some capacity. And I'm the type of person that's like, if it's free for me, SonarQube is really, really good for any type of SaaS scanning. So I would say learn SonarQube. I know a lot of organizations do leverage SonarQube for a lot of good reasons. Zap for, automated penetration testing of your application. Zap is really good for that as well. And there's Nikto, there's Trivy, Claire. Trivy is, vulnerability scanner for containers and also cloud native applications. And then there's also some books at the bottom here that I would implore y'all to read as well. Agile application security, definitely take a look at that. In the realm of software development, programming, you'll understand or you'll learn a lot about these various different concepts when it comes to software delivery, like Agile and Waterfall. Waterfall is the traditional method. It's basically plan everything out, make sure it's perfect, and then build. Agile is just like, no, plan, build, plan, build. It's very iterative, just FYI. But knowing those will definitely help you as well. So definitely memorize or start learning about those concepts too. And I know I spoke a lot, but essentially your roadmap is this. This is your roadmap for getting into DevSecOps. And this home lab is a good start for actually building out your project so that you can start to learn a lot about DevSecOps, so that you can learn how to build your pipelines and stuff like that. And that wraps up this video, y'all. Thank you all so much for watching. If you found this video helpful at all, please make sure you like, subscribe, and also share with your friends as well. This is something I'm really passionate about, so I appreciate y'all for listening to me ramble and also share, how to get into DevSecOps and what that roadmap looks like, especially for the year 2025. Thank you again, and I'll see y'all in the next video. Later.